Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in today. This is Writing Freelance Proposals That Win, and I am Kritika Narula. I will be with you for the next 20 minutes as we discuss freelance proposals and how to write them. I've been a freelancer for more than 8 years now, and the way that I have landed gigs and projects and assignments has varied a whole gamut of different sources. It has been a spectrum of something from as simple as a phone call with an old friend to something as elaborate as responding to a request for proposal, going through an entire bidding process before I land a contract when it comes to bigger organizations such as the UN agencies. Um, in a lot of these experiences, the one common thread I have found is that I've always had to write a proposal. Whether what that proposal looks like can be different. Whether that proposal is an elaborate 30-page document, or if it is something as simple as a message or an email where I just insert links to relevant profiles, to relevant portfolio, to relevant work samples and other websites. A proposal in whatever shape or form is always a norm when you are a freelancer. So what you need to do is when you're writing proposals, you need to understand what is it that the proposal is going to do for you, and how you can make sure that the proposal actually wins. It is also important to understand what I mean by proposals. So let's look at that. We have, you know, different definitions of proposals depending on where your lead is coming from. And when I say lead, I mean your prospective client, right? So you may be finding them on a gig platform such as Upwork, Extra Expertise, or Juno. You may be looking at standalone applications, or you might actually be responding to one of those elaborate request for proposal calls. In all of these scenarios, the proposal outline would look different. If you're looking at gig platforms, the proposal outline would be something that happens within the user interface of the platform. So you will only be able to pitch your services, you will only be able to express interest in an assignment. You may have some space to talk to the to do sort of send a message to the prospective client about how you're going to do things or answer a few questions they have asked, depending on the platform. But like I said, this will be within the contours of the platform. You will be restricted to what the platform allows you to communicate about. So that's about the gig platforms. But irrespective of that, your proposal becomes your profile. Your proposal becomes the message you send. And it is very important to sieve through, say, 10 projects you have done and send them the one that's most relevant to their need. Then moving on towards the upper side is standalone applications. By standalone applications, I mean when people put out a public call for freelancers, they either post on LinkedIn, they either post on message boards, communities, they post job post on one of their job HR platforms, or there are listings elsewhere. Basically, we also have a lot of freelance job boards these days, which is great news for us. But the idea is you're making a standalone application there. So it's for that particular project, for that particular brief. And in those scenarios, most likely, they will have a good idea of what they are looking for from a freelancer, or they might not. This puts us in a very unique position where you cannot completely position yourself as a particular type of freelancer because you may not know what they need. Sometimes LinkedIn posts will be as vague or as broad as someone saying, I'm looking for a freelancer who can help me with some copywriting work. Or I'm looking for a freelancer who can help me with some communications work. Now, that could entail something from event management communications or internal communications. Both of them are very different skill sets, but it might also be that they are looking for a generalist freelancer, in which case you might be better off not pitching your niche services, but actually keeping a broader outlook to this. Then it comes, after the standalone applications and gig platforms, we come to pitches. Pitches is basically instead of you going to someone who is already in need of a freelancer, you are going and pitching your services to someone who may or may not be actively looking for freelancers to work with. This means that it has both cold and warm pitching involved. And effectively, this will be more of a concerted, very focused way of reaching out for a particular assignment. What comes to mind is if you have a particular idea for a campaign, or you are a journalist who's going to be pitching. Those are the ideal scenarios for a pitch. Um, and these can also be warm pitches. So someone gives you an idea that a particular organization, brand, person might be looking for something. They're not sure, you don't have a complete picture, but you have met them through someone, or you have gotten to know through someone that they may be up to that. So you can reach out to them as well. And then, because warm pitching is this one step above that would be proper referrals, which is someone's looking for someone, and they may not have posted this publicly, but someone refers you to their needs, so which can be probably fulfilled by a freelancer. So that becomes another part of this. And then this brings us to the the most structured end of the spectrum, which is request for proposals. These are open calls. These are elaborate calls where um, the organization has spent a lot of time in assessing, in auditing what their needs are. So instead of saying that they are looking for a content writer or a graphic designer to help them out with some assignments, a request for proposal will have a proper scope of work, a proper bullet list of all the different tasks they will work with you on. And you will be asked to send a quotation. You'll be asked to send your timelines, your process. You'll be basically asked to give them an insight into what it would be like to work with you if they ended up choosing you. So these are all different scenarios, but as you will notice, it is all a different type of proposal. So when I use the word proposal, it is both, it's always the second step after you have secured a lead. It is both the follow up that people ask after your initial conversation, but also the very strict outline of a proposal which is demanded in certain open calls. And the reason I am sort of, walking you through these things is because I think RFPs, request for proposals, or sometimes these are also called EOIs, which is expression of interests. These are a lot of formal avenues through which freelancers can find work. But these often slip through the cracks because we have a tendency to look at places which are more agile, for the lack of a better word. We end up looking at, LinkedIn, where we are constantly talking, constantly scrolling. We are more likely to look at our own communities where we might be able to talk to people. In my personal experience, what I've noticed is those places where you walk through, the RFPs and these processes, they may be elaborate. I have gone through a few processes where I submitted RFPs, which were, really thick documents. And then I have been shortlisted and have gone through interview processes. I've gone through trainings to be able to work with these organizations. It has been worth it because those are long-term contracts. Those are, contracts for 2 3 years. And it helps me stay on their roster, on their retainer, and so on. So as a freelancer, I think having these anchor clients is very useful, is very helpful. So you should definitely explore RFP calls as well. Which brings us to the next question. What would these different types of proposals all have in common? It's a three-step process you have to understand. Um, is your proposal going to be elaborate or not? Is answered by these three steps. First part is you have to understand the proposal and where it is situated. You have to learn the structure and the expectations from this proposal. So in the upcoming slide, I will be taking you through all the essential elements of a proposal. But my first tip will always be for you to read whatever the prospective client has asked, whether it is then email, whether it is a message, whether it is a proper call for proposal. You need to go through minutely what they have asked of you. Have they asked you to send your CV? Have they asked to send your LinkedIn profile? Have they asked you to send work samples? Have they asked not just any work samples? Have they asked for specific work samples exploring a particular kind of skill? So let's go back to the example of the communications skills, right? Someone's looking for a communications consultant, but if they haven't said anything else, you are free to share as many broad sort of variety of assignments and work samples. But if they have said very specifically that they are looking for someone who has helped with internal communication strategy, then you need to find work samples that align with that requirement. So that's one part of understanding, proposals and pitches. And a big part of this would be standing in the shoes of the prospective client and seeing what would benefit them, what would make their life easier, um, in order for them to be convinced that you are the person for this job. That's what it comes down to at the end of all of this conversation. You are convincing them that you're the person for this job. You're convincing them that you have got what it takes. So just step yourself in the shoes of the client. Let them see what is how you're going to make their life easy. Are you going to deliver in a way that's more efficient? Are you going to deliver in a way that's more aligned? Talking of alignment, you have to look at the second step here, which was crafting effective proposals. The keyword here is effective. So when I say effective, it means that you have to study what the client has asked for and align your proposal sections with the client needs. If you're writing a 5-page proposal, it better have all the sections as asked. There are often times when a client will ask you to give references, to share references within the proposal. There are often times when the client will ask you to share contact information. Maybe the client will ask you to share your proposed timeline. You should always make a proposal effective by checking all the boxes that the client is asking. Um, Here, I think it's important to mention a caveat, which is you may not always check all the boxes. You may not always have a complete overlap in terms of, previous work samples, for instance. But if you were to think about this, um, even 90% of the boxes are more than enough. What you have to do is be very compelling in showcasing that 90%. So if you have worked for, say, if you're a graphic designer and you've worked for clients say clients in manufacturing, you have worked for clients in SaaS, and you have worked for clients in food industry or hospitality industry. If you are working or applying or sending a proposal to a SaaS client, the ones that the portfolio that would be helpful and the experience that would be helpful would be SaaS clients. A big part of writing an effective proposal is also just sifting through it, editing it ruthlessly to know that you are including only the most relevant details. You may have done maybe several certifications over the last 5 years. But if those certifications are not relevant to the role or the requirement of the freelancer that the client has, they may not be interested in knowing that as much, especially if it's a very short, brief assignment. And that brings us to the final part, which is a lot of people are going to be applying when there are open calls. How are you going to stand out? And I don't mean standing out. Of course, one part of standing out is doing something beyond the proposal, connecting with people personally, finding out if you have if you have common people you've worked with, if you can reach out to them and strike a personal rapport. But how do you make your proposal memorable? Um, I think a big part, a very important point I need to mention here, because this is 2025 and a lot of people I've been talking to have told me how they use AI, particularly ChatGPT, to help them write proposals, which is a great use case. But if you're going to be feeding the same prompt that the client has sent, and you are asking ChatGPT to write it down for you, it is going to sort of send an output which is the same output for everybody. If you are inputting that, it's likely that all the other applicants are also going to be sending in that input, and receiving the same output. If you are going to use AI, be savvy about it. Try and tailor the input as much as possible to who you are. So maybe, contextualize the prompt in your experience. And by contextualize, I mean, if the prompt is, or if the call for proposal has just asked you to give a brief description of the last time you did a similar project, maybe instead of asking ChatGPT to give you a template on what you should write, maybe explain to ChatGPT what your project was, and it can help you with sort of structuring it and pitching it. So it can help you refine your language. It can help you refine the tone into more of a pitching tone rather than an informational tone. But you have to be careful that if you're not tailoring it and if you're not putting in this extra effort, your client is going to get a hint of how similar everybody's response is. So that's definitely a part you need to take care of. And it's very important that your proposal is memorable. So you need to give impact numbers. You need to give, whether it's tangible or intangible, you need to show the impact of your previous work. And I think this is so interesting to me and something that we miss so much. Um, you need to look at what work you did when you're sharing work samples. Very often, we just end up sharing work samples as screenshots or as ideas. We just send a link to a blog we wrote. We send a link to the design we made. But what helps going the extra mile here is if you're able to actually tell them, oh, you know what, this was the process behind, and this was the mindset behind how I did this. So if you take them through the process, that's an additional way of making your proposal memorable. Um, how do you end up finding these RFPs? You have to first identify the platforms. So in the next slide, I'm going to share those platforms, some platform names. So you have to find those platforms that list out these calls. Then you will find a particular RFP. You have to review the details. Is it applicable to you? You have to prepare a proposal in accordance with their instructions and submit the proposals. Very often RFPs come with deadlines. Um, and freelancers have been known to sort of work off of deadlines. So this should work in your favor. But very often, I think in the age of emails and messages, we often take a little bit of leeway when we think about, oh yeah, if I have to send it by 22nd midnight, I can send it by 23rd 5 a.m. Or if I have to send it by 22nd, it means midnight and not 5 p.m. Working the end of the working day. Um, Please note that when you're looking at, official RFP platforms, a lot of the times they will close the window right at the deadline. So you will not have the leeway that you usually have with sending out emails. Now, these are the platforms where you can find RFPs. So we have DevNet, we have Proposal Center. You can take a screenshot if you like. This will also be available in the recording. I have just shortened this a little bit because I think one of the names was not showing. So these are all the platforms that I have used in the past. Some of them I've used in the past to find RFPs in my field. And they definitely help you stay updated because if you don't have the, capacity to look through all the websites of all the possible organizations and brands you could be working with, these help you, these collate those RFPs. And so you are able to find them here. Moving on, this is probably another part where you might want to take a screenshot. These are all the elements of a freelance proposal. Now, you have to keep in mind just one thing. This may not be the exact format you use, but you have to make sure that you cover all of these pointers in the proposal somewhere. It does not mean that you have to have a dedicated section for your working terms and conditions, but it helps to have at least a sentence. For instance, if you work particular working hours, if you work asynchronously mostly, if you sign contracts for no less than 3 months, those are important things that you need to talk about right here in the proposal. So you firstly start with your professional profile and credentials upfront. That's the first thing that's going to make them convinced to shortlist you. So you have to give your credentials and your profile upfront. Beyond that, the second most important thing would be your work samples and portfolio. Like I mentioned before, your work sample should also have, as much as possible, your process as well. So not just a portfolio, not just a design, not just a blog you have written, but also the thinking behind that. The scope of work and the working terms. These two things I want to caveat here. In a lot of RFPs, they will specify what they want. If they haven't asked you to share all these things, you don't need to add these sections. But in general, if you have concerns about how you might want to work and what are your boundaries, it's good to establish those boundaries and those working conditions right at the outset. So you can have the scope of work, which means what is the breadth and length of your services and the working conditions. The pricing is, of course, a very important part. In a lot of RFPs, this is the most important part. They might either give you a form which will have to fill with your rates, or they might ask you to send your own rates, either hourly rates or detailed payment structures in terms of the milestones you hit in the project. And then, very importantly, contact details. I highly recommend having a letterhead where your contact details are intact so that you don't miss out on them. But in general, having a dedicated section for contact details is also a good idea. A couple of my tips when you're looking at RFPs, I've already mentioned this, but it merits reinforcement. When you are looking at or reading an RFP, I want you to look at the phrases they have used in the RFP and use those phrases in your proposal as well, because that shows a sense of alignment with what they are asking for. If you use different vocabulary, it may sometimes hint to them that you're coming from a different industry or a different job function, and you may not fit in very well with what they require. So you should try as much as possible, learn the vocabulary from these things, and also maybe go the extra mile and research the organization itself. use that language in your response, and you'll notice the difference. It's a very minuscule thing, but you'll notice the difference. An example here I've mentioned is that if they are saying we are seeking to amplify youth voices, you shouldn't say that I'll help you communicate better. You should say I'll help you amplify youth voices through storytelling and targeted media. So what this response has done is, A, it has spoken directly to what they are looking at in terms of their mission, but also you have given them actionable points. You've told them how you do it, and that sort of insight and peek into your process is very important. Another tip I have is, um, your methodology or your timeline and how you work. Very often you feel like it's just, say, a writing project. I know how I write. There's nothing I need to explain to them in terms of how the writing will go. But if you go the extra mile, it shows meticulous attention to detail. If you are able to outline the process, so you can also take the lead on this, if you and stay in charge of, in control of how the work goes about. You can share a proposed approach. You will deliver on this date. You will get the feedback on another date. You will do this XYZ part of the process on a different date. So, like you see in the example, different elements of the process have been laid out and how they will work together. It gives them an insight, and it also shows your command over your work. So that's another way you can set yourself apart. These are all the tips, and this is all I had to offer you about writing freelance proposal. I think one last thing before I wrap this up that I definitely want to mention. A lot of the times, freelancers, especially when you're writing proposal for the first time, freelancers are worried about how they should format it, if it should be fancy, if it should be colored, if it should be presentation, if it should be a deck, if it should be a Word doc, PDF, so on. All those questions they fade to the background when you think about the effectiveness of your proposal. If you're covering all these things, whether it's a deck or it's a PDF or it's a doc, it does not have a bearing on the final decision. That said, if the RFP has specifically asked you to submit a PDF, or a doc, or if they have specifically asked you not to share external links, but rather share things in a document, you should follow those instructions. But in the absence of instructions, and especially in the case of the loosely used word proposals where you're sending pitches or replying to emails, you shouldn't worry about the format as much as about the effectiveness of what you are pitching, the effectiveness of how you plan on working together. So it needs to be a fit for both of you. That brings us to the end of this session. I hope you found it useful. I am here online with you to answer any questions in the chat. So feel free to ask any questions, and I will be responding as in when we go. This is also my LinkedIn. You can scan the QR code or find me on LinkedIn, and ask your questions there, and then share any feedback you have for the session. Thank you so much. This has been lovely.